Good afternoon. I welcome you to a briefing at the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs. We have Russian and foreign correspondents with us. We start with the situation in Syria. We are closely following the dramatic events of the Syrian Arab Republic. As you know, our assessments were set out in the relevant statement of the Russian Ministry of Foreign Affairs on December 8. I would also like to emphasize that the absolute priority for us is the safety of all Russian citizens who are on the territory of the Syrian state, as well as the inviolability of Russian facilities and representative offices, diplomatic, military, and others, including those related to the activities of domestic companies and organizations. We proceed from the fact that there is no alternative to observing international legal norms governing the status and activities of Russian institutions in Syria, including the Vienna Conventions. Let me remind you that our diplomatic mission in Damascus continues to work, but continues to work in conditions of extremely high security threats. Now Syria is entering a transition period in which the country will inevitably face new challenges, which is happening literally live. We express our solidarity with the Syrian people, with whom Russia has historically had friendly relations. We sincerely wish the Syrian people to successfully overcome all the challenges, difficulties, and problems that arise. And we confirm our principled position in support of the sovereignty, unity, and territorial integrity of Syria. We stand for the early establishment of an inclusive political process, which should be carried out with the Syrians themselves on a platform on the path of a broad national dialogue in accordance with UN Security Council Resolution 2254, and we have repeatedly said all these years. We note the importance of unconditional consideration of the interests of all ethno-confessional groups of Syrian society. As you know, this is Russia's principal position. In the current situation, which can be described as a political transition, we see the preservation of Syrian state institutions and the performance of their respective functions as one of the priorities. We call on all parties involved to take a responsible approach and contribute to the speedy restoration of security and stability in the country. It is important to ensure the supremacy of the fundamental norms of law and the maintenance of law and order, the protection of the rights of the civilian population, to ensure civil peace and national accord, prevent acts of vandalism, violence, bloodshed, and terror. We maintain close coordination with international and regional partners, including on the platform of the United Nations organizations, in order to facilitate the early stabilization of the situation in Syria. Appropriate contacts are being made with the forces that are represented on Earth. We strongly recommend that our citizens take maximum precautions and avoid crowded places. All of our warnings regarding visiting Syria remain in force. I would like to say that, of course, we receive a huge number of questions from the Russian and foreign media, including from citizens of our country, regarding the qualification of the situation in Syria. I mean the reasons, the prerequisites of what is happening there, the participation of external forces, their roles, the roles of internal actors, and also their qualifications. I want to draw your attention to what I said at the very beginning. The priority for us at this stage is ensuring the safety of Russian citizens and the inviolability of Russian facilities. As for assessments of the situation in the country, as I have already said, we are closely monitoring the development of the situation. We will proceed from the actual state of affairs on Earth, act on this basis, draw appropriate conclusions, and give appropriate qualifications to these actions and processes. And we also believe it is important for everyone, for the entire international community, to refrain from any provocative statements, from provocative rhetoric that can negatively affect what is happening. There is also another one. There is another topic that is not quite traditional. Although we have repeatedly addressed this issue, we have done it periodically, but in such a way that it was a direct appeal from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs to Russian citizens. To be honest, this is probably the first time we have had this. In the context of the increasing confrontation in Russian-American relations, which are teetering on the verge of rupture, due to the fault of official Washington, trips to the United States of America privately or out of official necessity are fraught with serious risks. We have repeatedly told and given arguments on concrete examples, along with the extremely tough and discriminatory procedure for issuing American visas for Russian citizens who are forced to travel to third countries to obtain permission to enter the United States of America with absolutely no guaranteed result. And, by the way, non-return of money for the so-called service in case of refusal. Our compatriots have long been the object of literally hunting in the literal sense of the word on the part of the American authorities, and, first of all, on the part of the US Special Services. Recently, a fraudulent scheme has been practiced especially often to lure Russian citizens abroad, to whom the US authorities have some political claims that are qualified differently, but they do not speak publicly about them. How does this very luring happen? Luring under the guise of invitations, under the pretext of profitable commercial or tourist offers, followed by the detention of Russians who have fallen under the gun and their expulsion to American jurisdiction, according to extradition agreements. By the way, the full list of countries that cooperate with the United States on extradition issues will be available in the text version of the briefing website. We will post the corresponding link. In this regard, we urge you to refrain from traveling to the United States of America and its allied satellite states, including, first of all, Canada, and, with a few exceptions, the countries of the European Union during the upcoming holidays and in the future, not caused by extraordinary circumstances. During your stay abroad, you should avoid situations in which you can become a victim of provocation, be detained under the pretext of allegedly violating local laws, if there are signs of such a specific interest, with proposals to meet, discuss how it is sometimes formulated, and how it was formulated to those Russian citizens who later found themselves in American traps, in prisons. So here is a proposal to discuss certain conditions of cooperation, sometimes even employment for a generous reward. It is necessary first of all to recall examples of those cases when for many years we fought for the release of our citizens, who, among other things, came to the United States of America in order to negotiate a favorable contract, as some American representatives said. But it is also necessary to compare all the risks if this attention that Americans show to Russian citizens becomes so suspicious and intrusive. Then perhaps it makes sense to interrupt these contacts. It may make sense to reconsider your travel plans. Of course, and we always say this about it, we always confirm it. The diplomatic and consular missions of the Russian Federation in the United States of America and in other countries, as before, will provide maximum assistance in protecting the rights of compatriots who have fallen into difficult life circumstances. But in the current situation, especially based on those convulsive actions on the part of the Biden regime remaining in the White House, which we are witnessing, it is necessary, once again I want to say and emphasize this, compare the risks. And, at the same time, in order to avoid tragic incidents when the machine of American punitive justice leaves no chance for a fair trial, stamping literally mind-boggling terms of 15, and sometimes even 25 years in prison, one should carefully weigh the pros and cons, calculate the risks of traveling abroad. Well, of course, this does not apply to Russia's friendly states. We come to the situation around Ukraine. The Ukrainicists do not stop terrorizing the civilian population of our country, that is, their own population. Bandera members are subjecting the civilian population to daily artillery shelling and drone attacks. From the 5th to the 10th of December, the Russian air defense forces suppressed and beat up more than 200 drones launched by the IFU. Naval aviation destroyed 8 Ukrainian unmanned boats in the Black Sea. On December 6, as a result of a targeted attack by Bandera with the help of a kamikaze drone at a humanitarian aid delivery point in the town of Alyoshka, Kherson region. 3 civilians were killed and 3 more wounded. December 8, in Gorlovka, as a result of the dumping of explosive ammunition from drones and from uranium, 8 civilians were injured. 240 ammunition and 187 drones were fired by Ukrainian terrorists. At the settlements of the Belgorod region, 12 civilians were injured. All those involved in these and other atrocities of the Kiev regime will be identified. They will answer to the fullest extent of the law. Now, just about the punishment for the crime of the Kiev regime, Russian courts continue to sentence Ukrainian Nazis and mercenaries for war crimes on the basis of evidence collected by the Investigative Committee of the Russian Federation. Andrei Romashenko and Igor Ivanchuk, militants of the nationalist unit of the Armed Forces of Ukraine banned in Russia, were sentenced to 24 and 24.5 years of imprisonment in absentia. Such terms are due to the fact that they shot 2 civilians of Mariupol in March-April of the 22nd year. But the Nazis are on the international wanted list. Another bandit from the band, Azov, Denis Milevsky, was sentenced to 24 years. In March of the 22nd year, he gave a criminal order to kill 2 civilians in Mariupol. Mercenaries from Venezuela or Bina Palma in Hari Moises, as well as Georgy Akalai and Kartlos Rusateshvili from Georgia, were sentenced to 14 years in prison in absentia. Lada Sakurdia was sentenced to 18 years, a citizen of Kazakhstan to 20 years. The latter distinguished himself, of course, we take it in quotation marks, also by spreading calls to commit hereditary actions against Russians, with the help of social networks. In an interview with one of the channels on the American platform, he reported false information about the actions of the Russian armed forces in Mariupol, Buchaya at Navajo. 9 FSU terrorists received from 24 years of imprisonment to life imprisonment in absentia. Shestak, Morozov, Yavorsky, Shulga, Impolsky, Kolbasin, Shalar, Penzin, Romanyuk, who in March of the 22nd year fired from a multiple rocket launcher Grad residential buildings of the village of Old Crimea, Mariupol district. Investigative actions against the American mercenary Derek Bales have been completed. He was accused of committing a terrorist act in the Kursk region in August of this year. He is on an international wanted list. The investigative committee of our country has opened a criminal case against Colonel Pavlo Razlik, under whose leadership, in August of this year, the Kursk region was shelled with ammunition cassettes with asphyxiating toxic substances. As a result, at least 20 people were injured at that time. Russian law enforcement agencies will continue to work to bring to justice coronation Nazis, foreign mercenaries for war and other crimes. But despite the fact that the terrorist nature of the Kiev regime no longer causes anyone any doubts, there is a continuation of pumping it with weapons from Western countries. The West is intensively pumping weapons, money, betting on the escalation of the conflict. The incoming administration of Biden and the White House is literally working in an emergency mode. On December 7th, the head of the Pentagon, Alo Tostin, announced the next tranche of military products worth $988 million from the rostrum of the Ronald Reagan National Defense Forum. Moreover, she presented the provision of massive military assistance to the armed forces of Ukraine almost as the most important achievement of her department. The incoming Biden's team is ready for literally any action to prolong the agony of their Ukrainian puppets, but also for the sake of fulfilling pockets due to the criminal corruption scheme created over the years to pump money from Washington through the Kiev regime and Ukraine, and then back to those who signed the decision in the West to allocate these huge sums.
Ну а дальше обратно тем, кто подписывает решения на Западе о выделении этих огромных сумм.
According to the American press, the White House urgently tried to get Congress to approve additional assistance to the Zelensky regime in the amount of $24 billion, arranging it in the form of a bill on financing abnormal situations. But if the White House wants to finance the resolution of abnormal situations, then they should be engaged in their own domestic policy. In my opinion, the world has not seen anything more abnormal for a long time. Speaker of the House of Representatives Johnson preferred to bring this issue up for discussion, postponing this plot at the discretion of President-elect Trump after he took office. Yes, actually again, the newly elected president admits the possibility of revising spending on the needs of Ukraine on December 8th. In particular, in an interview with one of the American channels, he made it clear that the bank should not wait for the preservation of the previous volumes of American aid. On December 9th, the candidate for Chancellor of Germany from the CDU, Friedrich Merz, was in Kiev in absolutely such a revanchist frenzy and rushed here. He decided to discuss with Zelensky the strategy for further actions and the possibility of supplying German long-range Taurus missiles to Ukraine. He did not even hide his belligerent attitude to the German now. I repeat the words of the war-mad ex-British Prime Minister Johnson about the inadmissibility of forcing Ukrainians, direct quote, to fight with one hand behind their backs, which, according to Friedrich Merz, direct quote, is unfair and should be changed. However, the course of a special military operation, such steps aimed at escalating the conflict, will not change. Our country and our armed forces fully own the initiative along the entire line of combat contact, as the leadership of our country says, confidently solve the tasks assigned to them. What this leads to in the end, for those who dream of our strategic defeat, as they formulate it, I think it is obvious and understandable to everyone. I think that this should also be clear to these German politicians by some kind of call from the past. Well, it seems to me that in the absence of an internal consensus, an intra-American consensus on the amounts they are willing to spend on their Ukrainian-kept Zelensky, they apparently decided to move on to outright theft. On December 8, a message appeared about a resolution adopted by the Kiev regime, which approved the conditions for Kiev to receive a 40-year loan in the amount of $20 billion, as part of the initiative of the family group to allocate the Zelensky regime $50 billion from income from frozen Russian assets. It is behind all these words and political and financial formulations that the banal word theft is hidden. Apparently, Washington not only sanctioned the outright theft of funds belonging to Russia, but also tried, I believe, to kill two birds with one stone, to help Ukraine at someone else's expense, and at the same time, not to forget about your own benefit. At the request of the Americans, this transaction is executed in the form of an agreement, which is implemented by concluding a certificate purchase agreement. This is a certificate between Ukraine as a borrower and the US Agency for International Development, as well as contracts of guarantees and repayment of the court between Ukraine and the issuance by Ukraine, represented by the Ministry of Finance, of a debt certificate in favor of the Federal Reserve System, secured by a guarantee. The loan amount accrues interest of 1 and 3% per annum, plus the current average rate on annual US Treasury obligations, and their payment and repayment is made at the expense of income received from frozen Russian assets. It is clear to any sane person that we are dealing with the banditry and theft of the United States of America, elevated to the rank of state policy. Well, with his naturally henchmen, obviously, the United States has no funds left to help the Ukrainian Nazis, and apparently, just such real gangster techniques that were previously widely practiced in the United States of America will soon be used, but apparently they have not been forgotten there. This is what is called corruption theft. Theft, the link of state authorities in the United States of America, the creation of some kind of international cartel for money laundering,
смычкой государственных органов власти в Соединенных Штатах Америки, созданием какого-то уже международного картеля по отмыванию средств.
It's just, it seems to me, some kind of conglomeration of the most terrible thing that Washington has always struggled with in words. In fact, such monstrous black schemes are being produced for the withdrawal of other people's looted funds and their appropriation. Well, now about the topic that literally occupied the brains of American politicians, about lowering the mobilization age in Ukraine. Recently, the Ukrainian press has been actively discussing the plans of the Kiev regime to take such a step. That is absolutely not suicidal for the Kiev regime. Everything is already clear with them. This is a murderous step for the Ukrainian people. And this is being done, I mean, all these arguments on the banking of the Kiev regime under pressure from the administration, the outgoing Biden administration, because it is Washington that insists that the reduction of the mobilization age in Ukraine should take place according to the scheme, up to 18 years, in exchange for continued American military assistance. Here is another monstrous scheme, not just a corrupt, bloody scheme of life. Here are the Americans. They like all sorts of names for their companies. The company writes the word with the letter A. This, you know, money in exchange for lives can be called this offer, which Washington insists on. A representative of the US State Department, with some kind of exorbitant cynicism, said that in the case of recruiting young Ukrainians, immediately after they reach adulthood, Washington will take care of their full equipment. Matthew, I'm talking to Matthew Miller now. Why did the State Department not specify that the word equipment includes and implies burial as well? According to the Ukrainian media, an analysis conducted on Bankova showed that young people aged 18 to 25 years are 80% prone to desertion. That is, out of the 300,000 people called up, about 240,000 Ukrainian recruits will escape, who are well aware that they are being prepared at Bankova together with White Dove under the sauce of equipment.
На Банковой вместе с Белым Довом под соусом экипировки.
Coffins are being prepared for them there. Zelensky pretends that he cares about the future generations of Ukraine. Here he said the other day that, as a direct quote, the priority of the West should be the supply of missiles and the reduction of Russia's military potential, and not the reduction of the military age in Ukraine. And before that, what did he do? He lowered this age of conscription. This is an attempt now to somehow wash away from yourself, from at least some part of your puny little body. I'm talking about Zelensky now. Traces and bloodstains. Zelensky, like no one else, is interested, of course, in the continuation of hostilities. Their completion will inevitably lead to the political collapse of his regime. Therefore, he will, and this is obvious, do everything so that this does not happen in the foreseeable future. In the name of self-preservation, he, being the leader of this junta, will stop at nothing. He will make any sacrifice. It has been laid on the altar for a long time. The Ukrainian people, lowering the mobilization age in Ukraine, is of course a matter of time. Everyone understands this. Moreover, if the State Department promised something material for this, some money, in exchange for the lives of Ukrainian citizens, Already today, young Ukrainians under the age of 18 who have not registered for military service abroad. Ukrainian consulates have begun to refuse to issue foreign passports en masse. At the same time, I previously reported that for such a category of persons, it was allegedly possible to register in the register of conscripts remotely. And all this is happening against the background of the fact that Western countries, first of all the countries of the European Union, refuse to implement programs for their social, financial, and economic adaptation in their own territories. What does this mean? That the West decided to literally squeeze out those citizens of Ukraine whom it had previously called upon and promised them a lot. And now it will do everything so that, on the one hand, exerting pressure on the bank, Ukrainian passports would not be issued to them. Citizens of Ukraine who are abroad, Ukrainian passports would not be extended. And, on the other hand, completely stop, cut off, make unrealizable programs of their economic and social support in Western countries, where they have been all this time. But the dehumanization in Ukraine is not only going in one direction, it's all happening there on all fronts. Look, on December 5th, busts of heroes of the Great Patriotic War Sidor Kovbek, Ivan Chernyacki, Pavel and Alexei Fedorov were dismantled on the Walk of Fame in the center of Kiev. December 8th, a monument was demolished in Pavlograd, which was installed. It was a monument to the U-2 tank. By the way, it was developed by Joseph Kotin, a native of the same city. It was a response to the fascist tigers, panthers, and it was a monument created by the hands of local citizens, local residents. In such cave-like ways, Zelensky's regime completely identifies itself with the followers of Nazi Germany, tries to erase from the memory of the selfless Ukrainian soldiers and home front workers who liberated the Ukrainian USSR from fascist evil spirits. They can declare anything, but these are facts that cannot be erased from history. Now about UNESCO. Look at how many monuments have been demolished. And after all, a number of them were protected by UNESCO as special cultural values. So what about UNESCO? On December 4th, the Odessa City Council, which had succumbed to pressure on the Nazis, unanimously supported the dismantling of monuments related to Russian culture and history, including monuments to famous Odessans. The list for demolition included a monument to Pushkin installed in 1889th year at the expense of citizens. It is located within the boundaries of the UNESCO World Heritage Site, which is called the Historical Center of Odessa. The monument to Pushkin, this one specifically survived everything. He has survived 2 world wars, a revolution, a change of power repeatedly. I have also experienced ideological fluctuations. He didn't survive, but Zelensky's Nazi regime did. In October, it was reported that at the initiative of Odessa cultural figures, more than 100 people sent an open letter to this international organization, UNESCO, and they also sent letters to Zelensky with a request not to destroy the historical appearance of Odessa. This has nothing to do with their likes or dislikes towards Russia, our country. Moreover, the locals, a number of intellectuals who joined them from Britain, the States, Italy, and France, have never been seen in any kind of love for us as a country, as a state. But the barbaric acts of the Kiev regime horrified even them. In December, in connection with the threat of demolition of the Pushkin monument in the center of Odessa, the Human Rights Council sent an appeal to UNESCO Director Azula. And what about UNESCO, you ask? So we ask, what about UNESCO? The same structure receives money from the states. This is her direct responsibility. It's nothing. This once authoritative structure stubbornly maintains absolute shameful silence. It is significant in this context that there are no practical steps to support the memorial heritage of Odessa. On the 6th of December, look, an article was published in the Italian newspaper Domani, and its name is more than eloquent. Melanie, this is an appeal to the Prime Minister of Italy. We will restore Odessa. This does not mean an appeal, a quote. This is a quote from the Italian Prime Minister that she promised to help this city. So here's the headline. As Melanie said, we will restore Odessa a year later. The city has not received a single euro, end quote. This is the title of an article in an Italian newspaper. What is it about in this Italian publication? It states that as of November, within the framework of the Italian, as it is called, Laboratory for the Reconstruction of Odessa, it is planned until the 27th year of the budget. Why am I speaking slowly? Because it needs to be realized. At 45 million euros, 70,000 euros reached Odessa. And these 70,000 euros came through UNESCO. Question. If we subtract 70,000 euros from 45 million euros, we will still have a huge amount, almost all of it. Where are 44 million plus euros? I would like to ask a question not only to me, but also to Italian journalists. That's how they ask it. Rector of the Odessa Transfiguration Cathedral. This cathedral was damaged in July of the 23rd year by the Ukrainian air defense. Father Miroslav admitted to journalists that the parish was forced to independently look for money for its repair, and the city did not receive a penny from Italy. No, of course, maybe the budget is calculated until the 27th year. Maybe something will happen in the remaining two. But the pace of deception, lies, I do not know in this case what to call it. Forgery, they are certainly fantastic. But now a few more words about UNESCO. Here's a look. People turn to the organization. People from different countries write letters to UNESCO Director General Azula. They turn to other unstructures. Reaction zero. Moreover, it is actually strange that in order to see the demolition of monuments that are protected by UNESCO, under the current system of mass media, it is necessary. Well, there is no need for additional letters. This is open information that circulates in all media, in news agencies, in the plots of TV programs. It is UNESCO's task to monitor these conditions of these objects, not to wait for letters to be written to them. Letters can be written if we are talking about something really unnoticed, or for the future as a preventive measure, in order to warn about a possible negative development of events. Here, these monuments have already been demolished, or the desire to demolish them is discussed publicly, and this information is available to literally everyone. And after all, this task of UNESCO is to look after and protect monuments, and they don't. Moreover, they do not even respond to the letters that are sent to them in support of their own charter. These letters are sent. Is this an isolated case? Does this only apply to monuments? Oh no. The same situation is with journalists, en masse, journalists, mass media, representatives of the public, the Union of Journalists sent letters, sent an appeal, expressed everything they consider necessary to say in connection with the publication of the report of UNESCO Director General Azula, in which she did not see the death of Russian journalists. Although the report was devoted exclusively to the problems of the death of media representatives around the world forward, from the 22nd to 23rd year. Again, we do not see any reaction from UNESCO, the Director General, or other structures, although they could well comment, given that their mandate includes coverage of these issues, or he has always been proud of speaking with one voice, Or some, for example, the press service of the United Nations Secretariat, its press secretary, I mean the representative of the Secretary General, could help their colleagues in Paris, colleagues from UNESCO, and tell us something about this. 0. Moreover, all these letters are not just addressed to the Director General of UNESCO or the Secretary General of UNESCO. These letters have been published in the media, on websites, on social networks. They are all available in the public space. Moreover, after all, third-party journalists are interested. Those who see it in the news. What is the reaction of the United Nations? There are 0 reactions. In Ukraine, he continues to engage in the lifetime, you won't believe it, heroization of not only Bandar, but now also Zelensky, a photo spread in social networks, talking about the Kiev junta, against the background of its own giant images near the altar, of the removed canonical walk refectory church of the Kiev-Pechersk Lavra, in front of the junta representatives having a snack at the buffet tables. Junta and foreign guests. You know, well, there are limits to this cynicism, but on the other hand, it's not cynicism anymore. This is already sacrilege, because trampling on shrines, outraging, including the feelings of believers, is really an integral element of this diabolical self-assertion of modern Ukrainian neo-Nazis, and not only modern neo-Nazis, but, most importantly, their predecessors who were engaged in the same thing. As part of the total brainwashing, deputy of the Verkhovna Rada Petrovich initiated the release of a children-oriented comic book series about the Nazi agent Bandera in the image of a hero in this very Ukraina. On the occasion of the Day of the Armed Forces of Ukraine, and is still celebrated on the 6th of December, Ukrainian children were shown a cartoon masterpiece already made, where, just think about it, African Americans, Afro-Ukrainians are told the mythologized history of Ukraine. It is necessary somehow, of course, to refrain from emotions, but how to do it? Moreover, if this movie masterpiece does not say a word about what has at least some relation to the realities of the history of Ukraine. Here they explain to children that Ukrainians, together with American soldiers, defeated some foreign invaders during the Second World War. At the same time, not a word is said that these foreign invaders were fascists, German fascists, from whom the Ukrainian USSR was liberated by the Red Army soldiers, and that people of not only one nationality fought against Nazism and fascism. These were people in general in many ways who did not divide themselves or others according to nationality, and they fought just with those who divided people according to nationality, talking about who is the first, who is the second, who is without any sort at all. It's some kind of... It's just some nonsense, what's going on. And at the same time, they took an Afro-Ukrainian woman who would have learned the history of the same Babi Yar, would have known better what Nazism and fascism were, which did not consider people of another race to be people. Maybe I would like to know at least some textbook to read before voicing all this. And how similar it is to what is being done by Americans in other parts of the world. Here again, commemorative ceremonies related to the tragedy of Hiroshima and Nagasaki have now been held in Japan. And what do we hear? We hear words related to the expression of sympathy for the victims. A catastrophe, and no one says, but who did it? All these are primitive ways in which the Kiev regime is trying to deprive the young people remaining in Ukraine of the ability to think logically, on the basis of facts, and in general to reason independently. Children are brought up in the spirit of neo-Nazism with the sponsorship of the West. This has really become the state ideology introduced by the Kiev regime and Zelensky. All these listed facts once again confirm the relevance of a special military operation to denazify, demilitarize Ukraine, and eliminate threats emanating from its territory, and all these goals will be fulfilled, as the Russian leadership has repeatedly stated. We have drawn attention to the reports circulating in the media about the supply of anti-personnel mines by the United States of America to the Kiev regime. This information confirms Russian assessments regarding the ongoing pumping of foreign weapons into Ukraine, and their victims most often become civilians, including children. Unprecedented steps and actions taken by the American side against the backdrop of the Fifth Review Conference, which is taking place in Cambodia. It was held in Cambodia from the 25th to the 29th of November. We are talking about the review conference of the participating countries of the Convention on the Prohibition of the Use of Stockpiling in the Production of the Transfer of Anti-Personnel Mines and on their destruction, the Tatar Convention. So these steps are a clear example of the hypocrisy of Washington's policy of double standards in relation to various international legal instruments, including the Ottawa Convention. Look here, as recently as in the 22nd year, US President Biden officially announced a significant change in American policy regarding anti-personnel mines. In particular, the intention to make the necessary efforts for the country's accession to the Ottawa Convention, as well as the refusal to transfer and use this category of weapons by Washington in any regions of the world, with the exception of the Korean Peninsula, was stated. It was said, such a hasty departure from the installations declared by the President of the United States of America, in fact, describes and characterizes Washington as an unreliable, inconsistent, dangerous player in the international arena. In addition, by their actions, the United States of America literally encourages violations by the Kiev regime of its obligations under the Ottawa Convention, but Ukraine has been a party to this document since 2005 year. Russian law enforcement agencies regularly record and document all cases of the use of anti-personnel mines by the Kiev regime against civilians, against objects. In particular, since the 22nd year, 167 facts of blowing up civilians on an anti-personnel high-explosive FFM-1 pedal mine have been recorded only in the Donetsk People's Republic. It is also known about the widespread use of Ukraine and high-explosive PM2 mines and directed fragmentation mines MON-50 and PVP-50. We note a dangerous tendency for other Western countries, including Latvia, Estonia, and Finland, to revise their position on the Ottawa Convention under the pretext of, as they put it, the changed security situation. They, following Lithuania, openly declare their intention to withdraw from this international treaty in the very near future. Do you remember what they said earlier? Remember how they beat their heads and tables in the buildings of international organizations, proving that anti-personnel mines are so inhumane. Where has your humanity gone? I want to ask. Such actions are fraught with further undermining of the international legal system in the field of arms control, disarmament and non-proliferation, and degradation of the security situation, as well as escalation of the situation in Europe. Well, I can't help but answer a huge number of questions that we received in connection with the statements of the newly elected President of the United States, or the newly elected President. His statements about peace in Ukraine The fact is that Donald Trump, after a brief meeting with Zelensky on December 7th in Paris, and this meeting was held in the presence of Macron, appealed to the Russian president to immediately cease fire and start negotiations on peace in Ukraine. Donald Trump wrote on social networks, literally the following time to act. At the same time, they did not express any specific proposals or ideas. Also, not a word was said about the key thing itself, the readiness of the Kiev regime for such negotiations. What do you want to say? We had a lot of questions asking us to comment on these statements. What would you like to note? First of all, Russia is acting. Secondly, if someone expects that Russia will make some concessions, then apparently these people do not have enough knowledge, perhaps a short memory. Let's refresh. The fact is that it will not be possible to forget that it was our country that repeatedly showed goodwill in the name of reaching mutually acceptable agreements on the settlement of the Ukrainian crisis. Well, so it was, for example, in February of the 2015 year, when a set of measures for the implementation of the Minsk agreements was signed. Before that, however, Russia itself initiated them in the 2014 year, but at the end of March of the 22nd year in Istanbul, when, following the results of the next round of Russian-Ukrainian negotiations, there was a prospect of the parties reaching a peace agreement. We should not forget about this either, but each time the Kiev regime, its Western curators, disrupted the implementation of the agreements reached. Moreover, and then, as the cherry on the cake, Zelensky was banned from holding any negotiations at all. Officially, he signed the relevant document under pressure from the United States of America. It is also significant that the reaction of Zelensky himself to the mentioned call of Donald Trump was ignored across the ocean. Remember, the alleged leader of Ukraine, Zelensky, who has long lost legitimacy, responded to the US president-elect with a cynical refusal, and once again stated that he would not go to any peace agreements without security guarantees, by which he understands the country's membership in NATO. What is it all about? From the fact that achieving peace is not a priority for the Kiev regime. Yes, they do not measure in such categories at all. They don't use these categories at all. And why? And they were taught that way. Who? So the Biden regime and the White House administration have been training the Kiev regime for exactly the opposite for many years, for provocations, for non-compliance with international legal agreements, for ignoring international law, and for aggression. Moreover, it's just literally according to, so to speak, the description of instincts that Pavlov discovered and developed in scientific discourse for greater aggression, for greater non-compliance with the law, for greater provocations. The Kiev regime received greater remuneration from the White House. Hence the reflexology. The Kiev regime thinks in terms of war and hatches, as they said their peaceful plans, although they did not relate to peace, because they demanded more weapons. Then they moved on to some kind of victory trouble plans. And then they moved on to plans. I'm not even going to pronounce the names now, some kind of another one, and the essence was the same, the further escalation of the conflict, the receipt of large financial resources and large weapons. However, the United States prefers to keep silent about this for some reason. They shouldn't be doing this. According to the Ukrainian press, the head of the Office of the President of Ukraine, Ermak, who visited Washington last week, persistently begged representatives of the outgoing and future American administration to help the Kiev regime, direct quote, to retake territories along the border of the 22nd year and join the North Atlantic Alliance. This is one of the most terrible, in my opinion, historical tragedies that has ever happened to people in the world. What is happening in Ukraine? The monstrous deception that the Ukrainian people succumbed to under the exhortation of Zelensky, who was simply bought with his guts sniffed out. This is unprecedented. And all this against the background of the Pentagon's emergency pumping of weapons and military equipment, with an eye to ensuring combat operations for almost the entire 25th year. By the way, the frankly delusional idea of inflicting a strategic defeat on Russia, as they formulate it there, has not been removed from the agenda. So who is not interested in peace? Who refuses it all the time? Who prohibits it legally? Who uses aggressive, misanthropic, xenophobic rhetoric? The Kiev regime on American money, if Washington really wanted to put an end to the conflict, they immediately ordered their Kiev puppets to withdraw their positions on the territory of 4 new subjects of the Russian Federation. This would allow, as the President of Russia clearly indicated in his speech at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of our country on June 14th, to start negotiations. Of course, after Zelensky he will cancel his own decree, written under the dictation of the states, prohibiting them from conducting negotiations with the Russian leadership. Accordingly, we are talking about the beginning, about the possibility of starting negotiations on the non-aligned, neutral, nuclear-free status of Ukraine, its denazification, demilitarization. The implementation of the concrete proposals formulated by the head of the Russian state will make it possible to put an end to the conflict, to achieve its comprehensive, long-term and fair solution, based on the principles of strict reciprocity from the standpoint of our national interests. This implies taking into account the realities on Earth when forming a new geopolitical configuration based on the results of a special military operation protecting the interests of the Russian Federation, and excludes the intervention of third countries. There are a lot of questions regularly received after each message from Washington from the team formed by Trump. Questions of the following nature. Are you ready to contact the new team with Trump himself? We are certainly ready, including in the context of the settlement of the Ukrainian crisis. However, we have not yet received any serious working options that remove our country's legitimate concerns in the field of security and ensuring the rights of the Russian-speaking population. I would like to draw attention to the most detailed statement of Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Viktorovich Lavrov in various interviews that he gave to both Russian and foreign journalists, where he dwelt in detail on the Russian vision of the situation. And this is not only our vision, this is the vision that presupposes a real settlement. The situation in Moldova, the authorities of this country continue to try to justify their managerial failure by some kind of war, as they formulate it, on the part of Russia. All last week, the Speaker of the Parliament, Igor Grosuman, did not let up. Mikhail Popshoy did. They spent it in the USA, where they complained to their curators about Moscow, which allegedly, direct quote, is trying to return instability and chaos to Moldova, end quote. You know, they won't say that, we won't react, but as long as they allow themselves to do that, I'm sorry, get it and sign it. It is enough to look at the socio-economic indicators of Moldova during the period of San's tenure to understand that the current authorities themselves have brought the country to the edge of the abyss. They fostered chaos, they fostered instability, and the economy is completely dependent on external loans. The reduction of their inflow led to an increase in the internal mission, an increase in the national debt. According to media reports, it has increased in Moldova by 70% year-on-year over the past 3 months. As experts bitterly irony, only unemployment, indicators of falling birth rate, and population outflow are growing faster than the anti-ratings of the authorities in Moldova. Yes, it's a monstrous joke, but it's based on facts. The Chisinau authorities do not have a clear strategy for managing the situation. It is symptomatic that the government of the country has requested permission from the parliament to introduce a state of emergency in the energy sector from December 16th. And this is not the first case of an emergency. Before that, The state of emergency operated in Moldova for almost 2 years, from February 22nd to December 23rd. Residents of the Republic remember how it turned out. Uncontrolled attraction of Western loans, legal arbitrariness, extrajudicial killings of political opponents, closed, massively closed objectionable mass media. It is worth mentioning separately the irresponsible games of the Moldovan leadership with the security of the Republic. Recently, information appeared in the media about the plans of the Romanian company Rame Automechanica, a subsidiary of the German defense concern, to invest significant funds on, as it was said, the restoration of mechanical engineering in Moldova, given that the main activity of this enterprise is the maintenance and repair of armored vehicles of German and British production. In the interests of the armed forces of Ukraine, it is not difficult to assume what goals such investments pursue, as it was said there, that they can count money and drive others to do dirty and dangerous work for themselves in the West. Now, we have decided to combine them on the territory of Moldova, although the EU ambassador Janet Mazhikes, who took place at the end of November at the Chisinau Security Conference, boasted that the support of the Moldovan armed forces from the European Union during the period from the 21st to the 24th, when it reached 137 million euros, made the Republic the second largest recipient of funds in this area after Ukraine. So what are they going for? He forgot to add, although he stressed that Brussels intends to continue accepting them in the same spirit. He wants to ask, but to continue to what? Until Moldova is turned into a full-fledged participant in the conflict in Ukraine. Until they get to the citizens of Moldova, when will the citizens of Ukraine run out? And someone asked about the opinion of Moldovans on this score. Are you sure? We are absolutely sure that no one asked them, because they know the answer. The citizens of Moldova do not need it. This is eloquently indicated by public opinion polls, according to which 55% of Moldovans are convinced that things in the Republic are moving in the wrong direction. At the aforementioned conference, Chisinau signed another partnership agreement in the field of defense security, this time with London, as it was stated. The British are ready to allocate about £2 million to ensure cybersecurity, by which the Moldovan leadership understands the blocking of opposition, primarily Russian-speaking internet resources. Earlier, we drew attention to the signed similar documents with Norway and Sweden. Thus, the Moldovan authorities continue to move along the wrong path of the Kiev regime, leaving the fate of the inhabitants of the Republic literally at the mercy of the West. What Washington, Brussels, and London do in such cases is well known. They squeeze resources to the maximum, plunge the situation into a state of chaos, then they offer the recipient of assistance to solve the problems themselves. Don't believe it. Look at what they have done in Ukraine. And if their wards are unable to cope with the problems that have arisen due to Western politics, then who is declared guilty of everything? Well, of course not the West, but the one who failed. Well, as a matter of fact, a new champion of democracy is being sought to replace him. It seems to me that all this should be remembered in Chisinau before thoughtlessly declaring themselves part of, as they put it there, a rules-based world order. There are only one rules. The West destroys, brings chaos. How many new funnels are literally opening every day, into which even if not trouble-free, but those who know the value of their national interests and the peaceful life of countries are being dragged before this. Here's to the question of historical amnesia. A year has passed since the monument to the Soviet army, located in the center of Sofia, was barbarously demolished by order of the Bulgarian authorities. All statements about the need for its urgent restoration turned out to be a lie. Cut into pieces figures of a Soviet soldier, a Bulgarian worker, and a mother with a child. abandoned like scrap metal. This year, the 70th anniversary of this monument would have been celebrated, but apparently that's why they dealt with it so badly. The grandiose monumental sculptural composition was erected by the leading sculptors and architects of Bulgaria itself. Where were the funds taken from? So it was the donations of workers, and this sculpture was opened in 1954 year in honor of the great victory over fascism. They violated history, violated the memory of heroes, violated those who revered both history and memory, and also donated money for a monument. Their own were abused in Bulgaria. The following decades, until recently, Bulgarian citizens, veterans, heroes of Bulgaria, who kept the memory of those events, gathered en masse at Memorial and laid flowers to him. People who were grateful to their fellow citizens for the liberation of Europe from the Brown Plague, who were grateful to the Soviet Red Army for the liberation of Bulgaria, the destruction of the monument was one of the most shameful steps in the hybrid war against our country. And not only a hybrid war against our country, this hybrid war against civilization, against humanity, against the truth, has become part of a propaganda line to denigrate the role of our country in Bulgarian history, weakening the mutual sympathies of the peoples of the two countries. At the same time, we continue to communicate daily with ordinary residents of Bulgaria, with ordinary people, with representatives of sensible political and public associations. We know that the vast majority of Bulgarian residents do not support such actions of the Bulgarian authorities and want to maintain friendly relations with our country and just want to preserve their history. We are inextricably bound by values, eternal values, including the pursuit of true freedom, patriotism, and anti-fascism. We are convinced that truth and justice in relation to the liberating soldiers will prevail sooner or later. The main thing is that it is not too late for Bulgaria itself, because the loss of historical memory. This is the end of your own story, and there can be no future without history. Here's more about fakes. We have drawn attention to the next round of anti-Russian companies in Britain, this time in connection with the accusations voiced in the annual review of the National Cybersecurity Center at the British Government Communications Headquarters against Russia, as it was said, hostile activities in the field of information and communication technologies. It should be noted that the document does not provide any specific weighty arguments that would confirm the postulated accusations. Moreover, the analysis of the report shows that the imaginary threats attributed there in our country do not even occupy a central place in it. However, again because of the political conjuncture, the situation and so on. It is the geopolitical context that the mass media itself focuses on. What is it? Yes, this is part of a Russophobic company that is being promoted by the British ruling circles to create a political background that is beneficial to them. London is well aware that since the 9th of May of this year, the Global Intergovernmental Register of Contact Points for the Exchange of Information about Computer Attacks, launched just on the Russian initiative, has been working within the UN. In fact, it was created to assist in their investigation. Britain, being a participant in it, did not send us a request through this channel. It directly follows from this that the British have no evidence of Russia's involvement in malicious activities in the information space. Moreover, London is clearly not interested in finding the real perpetrators of a series of incidents, if such incidents took place at all, and they are not invented. Once again, preference is given to the concept of Holly-like, this megaphone diplomacy itself, and the cross is put on professional interaction in a normal conversation through the competent departments. We have repeatedly proposed such a formula, but London was not interested in it. Instead of outright insinuations, Britain should take care of the behavior of its wards. Look here, Zelensky openly declares the organization of hacker attacks, including by the hands of the Kiev-controlled army. And do you, I mean the Foreign Office, think that he will stop at something? These cyber cyborgs, Will they make distinctions between Russian structures or Russian users and British ones?
Российскими структурами или российскими пользователями и британскими?
Never.
Никогда.
They need hacked accounts. They need hacked accounts. They need hacked websites in order to replenish their pockets.
Для того, чтобы пополнять свои карманы.
They have already reached Western Europe.
Уже и до Западной Европы.
Recall the investigations against Ukrainian hackers, which have led to a number of court cases on the territory of a European Union country. Britain will be no exception. But for some reason, these egregious facts do not cause any outrage in London. Now about the Russian mass media. Today, the congratulations of the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia Sergei Lavrov were published, sent to the Russian newspaper, in particular the Moscow Komsomolets, to the editor-in-chief Pavel Gusev, on the occasion of the 105th anniversary of the founding of this publication.
Главному редактору Павлу Гусеву в связи со 105-летием со дня основания этого.
But this is not the only birthday. Yes, 105 years is certainly a fantastic date, with which I once again congratulate both the newspaper itself and the entire team on the same days, but it's true a little later. 19 years ago, on December 10, 2005, the RT TV channel also began broadcasting, for which the foreign policy of our country, other countries, and international relations are a priority topic. This period of existence of RT is really quite small by world standards, but the results are impressive, because it is one of the recognized leaders of the media sphere, both in our country and abroad. This well-coordinated professional work has yielded such results. These are indeed correspondents who have become stars of the global media space. They speak different languages. They understand each other perfectly. They are in hot spots. They are individuals, not only employees, dissolved in the professional tasks set by the media management. They are each an actor. They themselves form the very agenda that is only welcomed by the management of the TV channel, for which, in my opinion, honor and praise. Because in general, this is, I would say, a new word in modern journalism, when every journalist and correspondent is literally stimulated by the leadership of the mass media to independent creative work, not only within the framework of the collective and editorial task, but also with the aim of popularizing their creative and realizing their creative potential. After all, the TV channel is constantly developing and improving. He is not just keeping up with the times. It seems to me he is already far ahead of this time, setting new standards, setting new trends. In general, literally forming a fashion in the information environment. Well, there is one more aspect that I want to say on this day. After all, RT has become the main target for the so-called Western democracies, or better to say Western quasi-democracies. More than 110 sanctions and other restrictive measures, including a ban on broadcasting, blocking of resources, administrative penalties, have been imposed by the EU, Britain, the USA, Canada, and other nation-centric countries against the TV channel and its employees. I'm not talking about expulsions, detentions, and neglect. RT employees are subjected to real harassment, psychological pressure, physical intimidation, and even as it was on the part of the power structures of Western countries. RT does not give up at the same time. It seems to me that this only encourages them to work even more. They see it as a challenge. They believe that it seems to me that this is even some kind of incentive for them to move forward, despite the measures that are applied to RT, including simply exorbitant measures to pessimize them, to marginalize them. The audience's trust has not been lost. On the contrary, it is increasing. The channel has gained momentum, demonstrates to the whole world what quality journalism is, what modern journalism is, while preserving traditions. RT adapted to this very toxic environment created by the West and overcame it, significantly increasing his information presence, simply reorienting resources to countries that had not been covered before, and simply considering it as his own goals and objectives. Despite what the West promised to do with them, they are doing it all. The channel's popularity is growing on all continents. Congratulations to the whole team. Congratulations to colleagues. Good luck. And, by the way, we are not alone in our assessment. Look, on December 5th, the 72nd award ceremony in the field of journalism took place at the Journalists Club in Mexico, one of the oldest and most prestigious professional associations in the country. And among the laureates, representatives of the Russian media took a worthy place. Who is it? RT-TV channel received an award for reporting by Elena Villarviges, The Future is Under Threat of Mines. We are talking about the eponymous Puerto Rican island, which the United States of America has used for several decades as a testing ground for various types of weapons. It has been more than 20 years since the Americans left this place. Local residents still live under constant threat from unexploded mines and bombs remaining in the ground, suffering, as you understand, from various serious diseases caused by the accumulation of heavy metals in the body. And the second prize was awarded for Eric Fonseca's story, The Dance of the Northern Lights, in which a journalist who visited the Kola Peninsula told about this amazing natural phenomenon. The prize was awarded because of an interview by Camila Lozin with Sebastian Martinez, a member of the Colombian rebel group, Central Gestapo, which unites representatives of the dissident wing of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, who shared his vision of the complexities of the peace-building process in this country. Maria Fernanda Fadia was awarded for her production work on this story, and another outstanding interview with Maria, with Delia Dalgo, the first woman who was born in Antarctica, brought a well-deserved award to a journalist from above Pentada, representing the Sputnik Munda agency. The BRICS Media Network and TV, represented by the head of the Latin America department, has been awarded the Mexico Journalists Club Award for high professionalism in covering international events. It takes place annually, and it is awarded to outstanding Mexican foreign journalists, once again testifies to what I was talking about, the recognition of the work of Russian journalists around the world, no matter what bones of the West. You know, it's really nice, and you feel a sense of pride for our journalists, for our correspondents. And I want to congratulate them and say words of gratitude to them. There is another date that I would like to mention. December 12th marks the 80 years since the establishment of diplomatic relations between Russia and Nicaragua. This act of goodwill in 1944 opened the way for our peoples to come closer. However, it was the victory with the Indian Revolution in Nicaragua in 1979 that marked the beginning of a new stage in bilateral relations. We highly appreciate that in the 15th year, on the initiative of the Nicaraguan parliamentarians, on the day of the establishment of our DIPS, relations have become a public holiday in Nicaragua, the day of friendship between Russia and Nicaragua. It seems to me that this is a manifestation of fraternal friendship, solidarity, spiritual closeness, and a common desire for us to build a world based on equality, freedom, justice, and mutual respect. And we are glad that in connection with the celebration of this significant date, we will be visited by a representative delegation, headed by the special representative of the President of Nicaragua for the development of relations with Russia, Lorena Arteaga. We are pleased to note that today, despite serious external challenges, relations between our countries are successfully developing in the spirit of strategic partnership, which is cemented by constructive, trusting political dialogue, including at the highest level, with the effective work of the Bilateral Intergovernmental Commission. The sixth meeting, which is taking place just today, on December 11th in Moscow, systematically continues to strengthen trade, economic, investment ties, expanding cooperation in the cultural, humanitarian, and law enforcement fields, practicing practical partnership is successfully developing in the fields of healthcare, space, agriculture, transport, peaceful atom, overcoming the consequences of natural disasters, and personnel training. We highly appreciate the Allied cooperation in the international arena. Russia-Nicaragua stands in solidarity on the main issues of the global agenda, which are based on almost complete synchronization of approaches to the vast majority of topics, including the formation of a more just, pal-centric world order based on respect for the norms of the principles of international law, the UN Charter, unacceptable inadmissibility of interference in the internal affairs of sovereign states, non-recognition of illegal pressure in the form of restriction, sanctions, punishments, or the removal of so-called objectionable governments. We note the truly comradely cooperation of our countries within the framework of the group of friends in defense of the Charter of O. Russian non-Georgian ties are marked by many bright pages of joint activity, and in the most difficult moments Moscow and Monaco were together. We have overcome all the trials with honor, and our bonds have proven to be stronger than any of the most difficult turns of the epochs. The positive, in many ways unique experience of interaction accumulated over the past period is a solid foundation for further building up the entire range of bilateral relations. Congratulations to our Nicaraguan colleagues and friends on this significant date. By the way, here is another topic about historical falsifications. We have repeatedly, including today, drawn attention to the very selective approach of representatives of Western countries to the coverage of historical events, especially in those that have a significant, important, key role for our country to preserve the identity and freedom of those very Western states. Here in the same row are absolutely ridiculous in form and disgusting in content attempts, if not to silence, then to belittle the decisive contribution of the Red Army to the liberation of Europe from fascism during the Second World War. We have to state that today the rewriting of history in the West has been put on a systematic basis, brought to the state level, and as a result, we are witnessing not only the solemn processions of SS veterans, the so-called veterans, as they are called, honoring Nazi criminals in countries that do not hesitate to call themselves, as they put it, a stronghold of civilization, but also the efforts of Ukrainian politicians, inspired by their Western patrons, to build their own statehood on a lie, xenophobia, cave nationalism. Today, the Russian army is forced to resist the already modern forms of Nazism, which has become, as we have already said today, the basis of the state ideology of the Kiev regime in Ukraine. We intend to fill in the gaps in the memory of our former allies in the anti-Hitler coalition with regard to the key events of the Second World War for us of the Great Patriotic War, that's between the 22nd of June of the 41st year, when almost the whole of Europe was captured by Hitler without any serious resistance, and the landing of the Allied troops in Normandy on the 6th of June of the 44th year took almost 3 years, during which the hardest battles of the Red Army with farms did not stop. During this time, thanks to the steadfastness and courage of the Soviet people, this very Hitlerite military machine suffered fatal damage, which largely predetermined the subsequent collapse of Nazi Germany. Having liberated their land, the Red Army, the Soviet Army, went to liberate Europe, reached Berlin, put an end to this war. Today, I would like to recall the Horde operation. It took place on the territory of Belgium from December 1944 to January 45th. Her 80th birthday will be celebrated on a grand scale. A large number of delegations from different countries, with the exception of our country, will take part in the memorial events. As you know, we don't ask for other people's events. We have enough of our own. But in general, these events are directly related to our country. And I would like to remind you about this now. The breakthrough of the tank and infantry formations of Wergmut in the orders, which began on December 16, 1944, led to the fact that the American-British troops were forced to retreat almost 100 kilometers. The commander of the combined forces of the Allied forces, Eisenhower, wrote to Washington that if the Soviet troops did not launch a new major offensive, then the Allied forces in the West would end up, direct quote, in the most difficult situation. Once in a critical situation, she threatened to surrender Strasbourg and Paris by the Allies. They were forced to turn to Moscow. On January 6, 1945, British Prime Minister Winston Churchill sent a message to Joseph Stalin, asking him to immediately intensify the offensive actions of the Red Army on the Eastern Front, in order to pull back some of Hitler's troops on the Western Front. It is noteworthy that before the Horde operation, the leaders of the United States and Britain did not consider it necessary to coordinate their plans with Moscow, and then it was necessary to meet the Allies. The headquarters of the Supreme High Command moved the timing of the Red Army's winter offensive in Poland to the beginning of 1945 year, despite adverse weather conditions that limited the use of aviation. During the 23 days of the Oars of the Branch strategic offensive operation, Soviet troops swept away the Nazis, advancing to a depth of 600 kilometers and extending the breakthrough to 1,000 kilometers. A significant part of Poland and Czechoslovakia was liberated from the Nazi invaders, and military operations were transferred to the territory of Fascist Germany. Our rapid offensive in the east forced Hitler to transfer 15 of the most combat-ready German divisions from the Western Front. This allowed the Allies, by January 28 of the 45th year, to throw German troops into the positions they occupied before the start of the operation in Ordyny, and on January 29 to launch their own offensive against Germany. Today, we see the desire to mythologize the image of the company of the Allies of those times, to give the appearance of a triumphant one-man march to liberate Europe of the individual. And in this particular Western policy, individual journalists and the media are literally turning everything upside down, trying to present that operation almost as a key factor. I mean the order operation, a key factor in the advance of the Red Army on the Eastern Front. We do not just condemn, we do not just reject such politicized, frankly dishonest attempts to distort historical facts. We counteract them. Letters from British Prime Minister Churchill and US President Roosevelt to Stalin have been preserved in Russian archives, in which they expressed gratitude to the Soviet Union on behalf of their governments for their assistance during the critical days of the order operation and recognized the decisive role of the Soviet offensive in the East for its favorable outcome. These are facts. These are documents. If the West continues to insist on its version of rewritten history, they will have to admit that these documents are invalid, that they were not sent simply to disavow. Then they will have to say the words of the leaders of their own countries of that period. Просто дезавуировать тогда им придется слова руководителей собственных стран того периода. Are they ready for this? If not, they are obliged to recognize these documents and accordingly build their position on the basis of historical facts. We pay tribute to the memory of those who fell in those terrible battles in the orders, but we also invariably remember the decisive contribution to the common victory, the feats of the great achievements of the Red Army, which put its shoulder to the Allies in the most difficult moments of that bloody war. Well, and on a festive day tomorrow. The fact is that, as you know, the Constitution Day of the Russian Federation is celebrated in our country on December 12th. In the 93rd year, this day was voted on by the people, I mean 1993rd year. Then the basic law of the country was adopted. He laid down the key principles of the federal structure, established the structure of the highest state authorities, became a solid foundation for the formation of a modern political system, and the strengthening of Russia's sovereignty. In the era of global changes, the Constitution continues to be the guarantor of social stability, respect for human rights, citizens' rights, preservation of natural heritage, the integrity of the country, ensuring its further development, maintaining the basic values of our society, family, patriotism, the richest spiritual and cultural traditions. The preamble of the Constitution stipulates that the multinational people of the Russian Federation are aware of themselves as part of the international community. The Russian Foreign Ministry in its work is invariably guided by the provisions of the Constitution and, in cooperation with other authorities, does everything possible to implement the tasks set in it. Our country pursues a sovereign foreign policy course determined by the understanding of Russia's special role in maintaining global peace and security. And I am ready to answer your questions. Is international life with us?
Yes, Vadim. Good afternoon.
Hello.
You have already touched upon the Syrian issue at the beginning of the briefing. And yet, how would you comment on Israel's intervention in the Syrian crisis and the entry of Israeli troops into the territory of the Syrian Arab Republic?
As you know, the actions of the Israeli armed forces, which occupied the buffer zone in the Golan area and a number of adjacent areas, obviously violate the terms of the Syrian-Israeli Agreement on the Separation of Forces from 1974. And, of course, the international community is seriously concerned about the actions of the Israeli Air Force, which is carrying out massive rocket and bomb attacks on military civilian targets on Syrian territory. These forceful actions obviously do not serve the tasks of stabilizing the situation in Syria, and on the contrary, they further aggravate the already extremely difficult situation that has developed in this country in recent days. We believe that in the extremely difficult military and political circumstances in which the friendly Syrian people find themselves, all members of the international community, especially neighboring countries, need to exercise restraint, the highest degree of responsibility, I emphasize once again, without provoking further degradation of the situation in Syria by their actions. And since everyone is verbally concerned about the interests and security and rights of Syrians as citizens of this independent country, this must be backed up with deeds. It is important to stand firmly on the position of strict observance of the norms of international law, the principles of unconditional respect for the sovereignty and territorial integrity of the Syrian Arab Republic, and the previously assumed international obligations in respect of this country, this people. And once again I want to say, here is a verification of the statements of all those who care about human rights and speak of themselves as a state governed by the rule of law.
Thank you.
Thank you. Let's move on. We have news with us. Yes, Maria Vladimirovna. Hello. I wanted to rephrase the question of my previous colleague a little more. And could you comment on the statement of the Iranian supreme leader, who said that the invasion of Syria and the military coup are the efforts of not only Israel, but also the United States, and that Iran has proof of this? And this is the first question, and I can ask the second one right away. I can after your answer. Let me answer this one first, then I'll answer the second one. You know, it seems to me that there will be a large number of facts. I said that the situation is only being analyzed, which will qualify what happened in Syria. But if we are talking in particular about Israel, the Israeli leadership speaks openly about its role in these events. Of course, I say again, there will be additional facts, but this is the openly publicly stated position of the Israeli leadership about involvement in the events in Syria. They don't even hide it. As for the United States of America, they have purposefully imposed sanctions on Syria and the Syrian people for many years. And now they say that the events are somehow connected with the people's dissatisfaction with the socio-economic state of affairs. So this is the socio-economic state of affairs. We formed the United States in many ways, considering it humane even to ease sanctions for the period of the pandemic, when all countries should have, all normal countries and peoples helped each other, and should have helped in such situations in general in principle. Even at that moment, the United States of America was thinking how, so to speak, to treat Syria and the Syrians more harshly, in order to have factors of influence on the situation. Therefore, here I say again, the right of every nation, everyone was investigated. an investigator, a politician, a journalist, to look for facts confirming this or that approach, to provide them to the public. But it is very important to hear and see what countries are saying, literally from the first person at the official level, declaring their involvement in this situation. Thank you. And the second question. Vladimir Zelensky said that he intends to call Joe Biden and discuss with him the possibility of Ukraine joining NATO. Here, I want to understand what he hopes for, makes such public statements. What goal does he pursue at all? You know, Zelensky hopes that they will give him money, they will give him weapons, that he will not run out of magic powder, and he will get away with everything, because he was involved in monstrous corrupt deals with the Biden family. That's what he always hopes for. But also maybe, let's not forget about, so to speak, the painful ambition that never let him go. This is the bulwark of his hopes. And I think one of the strongest factors is that he was involved, and the Kiev regime in principle was involved in a monstrous one. I repeat, it is this word that is monstrous in scale. In terms of the illegality of the corruption scheme for pumping money from the West, and in particular American, and not even pumping, but pumping this very Western money through Ukraine and returning it to those who made the decision to allocate it. We cited a huge number of facts. Now these facts are beginning to emerge already in the West. Well, as a matter of fact, Biden's pardon of Biden, and for all the crimes of the decade, speak for themselves. This is what he is counting on, Zelensky, having the relevant documents, relevant information, and believing that this will guarantee I don't know what, his impunity and so on. But he is very wrong. Thank you. So is the Media Corporation of China with us. Yes, good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna. We had two questions today, but in principle you have already answered one of them on Israel's actions in Syria. So I will ask another one. The other day, the Politburo of the Central Committee of the Communist Party of China held a meeting to analyze the study of economic work that will be aimed at next year. At the meeting, among other things, it was noted that the Chinese economy as a whole was stable this year and showed progress. Well, the main goals and objectives of socio-economic development for this year will still be successfully fulfilled. The 24th year is coming to an end. How would you assess China's economy? Are there any interim results already in your opinion? You know, it seems to me that it is definitely inappropriate for us to evaluate the Chinese economy, because there are Chinese relevant statistical institutions for this. There are internationally recognized bodies, organizations, structures, and so on that evaluate it. In other words, some within the country give an appropriate assessment and give facts. The second compare the state of the economies of different countries according to the appropriate criteria. We are confident that the Chinese leadership also has up-to-date, reliable information about the state and prospects of development of the Chinese economy. We see how China has been demonstrating stable and high rates of economic growth for many years. We hope that positive trends will prevail in the future. I would like to focus on the fact that Russian-Chinese cooperation in the practical sphere makes a significant contribution to the economic development of our countries. Strategic partnership is deepening, in particular in the energy sector. Oil and natural gas supplies are increasing. Industrial cooperation is advancing, including in the automotive industry. Cooperation in agriculture is expanding, and in particular we are strengthening contacts on the scientific and technological track. We are also talking about such an area as space research. We have repeatedly commented on this topic. Our economies, according to the estimates of the two countries, complement each other well, provide opportunities. By the way, it seems to me that there are unlimited opportunities for further growth. There are indicators for the joint, I mean our trade turnover, which has maintained a positive trend this year. I think that Russian-Chinese relations will continue to play an important role in improving the well-being of the peoples of our country. And since I am answering your question about the Russian part, then of course our people, yes. Thank you, thank you. Is Reuter with us?
Maria Vladimirovna, good afternoon. We are with you. We have two questions, both about Syria. Although you and other representatives of the Russian authorities have partially commented on them, the leadership has repeatedly commented on them. But maybe it will be possible to get some details from you. Here's the first question. Did Russia help in the evacuation of Assad and his family from Syria, and, accordingly, what was this assistance? Did the Russian authorities conclude any agreements on his safe flight to Russia?
Well, assistance was provided to the necessary extent within the framework of the humanitarian gesture mentioned. As you correctly said, I would put it this way. I wouldn't talk about the details right now.
Thank you. And the second question, in fact, concerns what is happening now in Syria. How do you assess this? You have already said today. But what kind of developments could be expected there? According to the Russian world,
I didn't understand the question.
What kind of developments in Syria could be expected in the near future or in the longer term? According to the Russian Foreign Ministry.
Oh, you mean. Now you have such an interesting formulation. That is, what will happen next?
Yes.
You know, we proceed from what I have already said, that if we talk about our priorities, I emphasize once again, these are issues of security of Russian citizens, Russian facilities where Russian citizens are located. I won't list it again. You heard it in the introductory part. As for Syria, this was stated by the representatives in Damascus, who are forming such authorities or power structures right now, having designated as their main goal the preservation of the country's sovereignty and its territorial integrity. Well, I'll add something else that we've been talking about all these years, the need to preserve and maintain intraethnic and interfaith unity. Work to prevent, so to speak, the clash of these groups, pitting them against each other, or any provocative actions that could lead to the degradation of the situation.
Стравливание их или каких-то провокационных действий, которые могут привести к деградации ситуации.
This is what those who form the new authorities in Syria are concentrating on, as I have seen from the relevant statements. And I also added those approaches that we have always considered relevant. Well, you've just heard them already. How much will it be possible to do? Well, you know, it seems to me that it's not about fortune-telling, but about a specific job.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you. Is the news portal with us? Ru.
Maria Vladimirovna. Hello. News portal. Ru and Pavel Vorobyov, we are with you. And we have one question for you as follows. How can you comment on the statement of Turkish President Erdogan that there are now only two real true leaders left in the world, he and Vladimir Putin? Doesn't this mean that soon Russia and Turkey will have to act together, for example, in some conflicts in the international arena?
Well, you know, it seems to me that we are talking about the personal assessments of the Turkish president, which should be commented on by his subordinates of my counterpart from the Turkish side. That's the first thing. Secondly, it seems to me that the quote was not exactly the same as you just said it. It was expanded. It seems to me that there was talk about experience and so on. But in any case, in my opinion, This is still a topic for comment by Turkish colleagues. As you know, our country treats our colleagues and the leaders of friendly countries with respect, maintains dialogue with them, develops relations, and regularly conducts contacts, including on the territory of our country. But once again, I would not like to comment on this phrase, because I believe that this is a matter for the Turkish side.
Clearly. Thank you.
Thank you. Is this a Moscow Post with us? Yes, hello. Today, we have one question on a slightly different topic. Let's move away from Syria and the Middle East. Kenan Georgescu won the first round of the Romanian presidential election. The Constitutional Court of the country cancelled the results on the basis of intelligence reports on the allegedly high activity of one of the candidates in social networks. How can you comment on this, especially against the background of the West's reaction to the protests and positions? Well, it seems to me that this is simply an unprecedented case. To be honest, if we talk about countries that consider themselves either Western democracies or aspiring to become, so to speak, a semblance of Western democracy, I honestly hardly remember this. Indeed, 2 days before the second round of the presidential elections in Romania, this second round was supposed to take place on the 8th of December, the Constitutional Court of this country, and this was done contrary to its own decision adopted earlier, which confirmed the results of the first round, issued once again, in my opinion, an absolutely unprecedented verdict on the cancellation of the electoral process, the need to hold elections anew. They justified it all with some violations on the part of one of the candidates, and of course threats to national security. As we can see, repressions have already begun in the spirit of a witch hunt against supporters of the leader of the presidential race, and there are already interrogations, searches and detentions in the Romanian media from the American feed. First of all, some completely far-fetched version is being replicated about the alleged interference in the elections by Russia. It is difficult to comment on the so-called proofs at all. This is all some kind of incompetently concocted nonsense. It's even impossible to reject these insinuations here because it's just the dirtiest fake. You see, when you reject something, you refute, well, at least there may be some kind of texture or distorted or false. Well, at least something, but this is already what is happening right now and what happened in Romania. It's so beyond the absurd that it's themselves the citizens of this country cannot understand. Our country has nothing to do with the Romanian domestic political vicissitudes. It's true that we are not involved in this in principle, but it's just really an anecdote, which is exactly how it is perceived inside Romania. I think you just need to see the real reasons for what happened. A significant part of the electorate during the presidential and parliamentary elections held on December 1st in Romania refused to trust the current ruling elite, which apparently did not fulfill the promises made to citizens during the previous elections. Now there is a demand for some new concept, for new leaders in Romania, who might be able to put national interests at the forefront. To do this not at the behest of the West, but based on the interests of the participation of its people. This is one of the versions I don't know. It's better for them to figure it out themselves. But it's obvious that everything that is happening has caused panic in the Bucharest elite, including among Western curators. It seems that there was some kind of a shout from the outside, and a stopcock was pressed or pulled in Bucharest, understanding, or maybe not understanding, all the costs that this will all be associated with, but it was no longer up to that. It was necessary to stop in the implementation of democracy. Although once again, they had the first tour, it was recognized as having taken place by the Romanian constitutional bodies themselves. But of course, if we talk about the norms of democracy, this is, of course, a blatant example, a violation of basic civil rights. And of course, the most monstrous thing is silence, collective silence, such choral silence of international structures, such as the Human Rights Council. But I'm not interested in what's going on in Romania. The ODIHR of the CS, the Council of Europe, is not like in other cases. There are even no such analogues. But in the case of normal elections, standard ones, with internationally recognized results, which are confirmed by international observers, they always have something to say, they always have something to criticize, and sometimes just ready to come up with something, just to say something. There are a lot of examples. And in this situation, something apparently went completely wrong, and they fell silent. There is no doubt that in the coming months, everything will be done to move from democracy, so to speak, to the manual management of this democracy. Apparently, to drive the lost voters of Romania back to the system led by the globalists. I think that after this incident, many people in Romania itself, abroad took a new look, or maybe not that in a new way, but just really looked at what is happening in the world. I just need to say again, repeat this word, really look at things. It must be understood that behind the words about democracy, about its principles and norms, the West often understands completely different things or is not going to fulfill what it has declared as a priority. But I want to say once again that this is, of course, an unprecedented case, but extremely revealing. Thank you. Thank you. The tape is with us, Ru.
Yes, good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna.
Good afternoon.
We have two questions. One of them is also about the situation in Syria, but this topic has not yet been raised in this perspective today. In general, is it planned? Is Russia planning to establish diplomatic relations with the new Syrian authorities? And what steps is it planning to take to maintain a political and economic presence in Syria? As well as what is the probability of excluding the Hayat Tahrir group that came to power?
Let's do it gradually. Now, come on. The first is about, as you said, the establishment of diplomatic relations. We have them installed. We have active and developing diplomatic relations between Russia and Syria. If you say, therefore, in this plane, I believe that even to formulate the question in this way is wrong. If you are talking about contacts with various political movements, then, as it was said in the statement of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of December 8, we support them with various political figures, various political forces. Yes, indeed, we are developing them. As for concrete steps, well, I think that, of course, we should first of all wait for the institutionalization of power in Damascus, because this process has just started. That is, before that there was absolute chaos. It is only now that some authorities are beginning to manifest themselves, which declare their powers. Therefore, now the whole world is watching how a certain power will be formed in Syria, and in the future, it will be possible to move on to the practical part of your questions. Your question here. And the third thing you wanted to ask.
The third one is within the scope of this question. What is the probability of excluding the Hayat Tahrir group from the list of banned organizations in the Russian Federation?
Well, as I have already said today, it is necessary to proceed from specific cases, from specific actions, from specific manifestations of one's activity. That's what we should proceed from. And how can one speak in theory, so to speak in general, and so on? These are quite specific things that will imply a specific assessment of them.
будут подразумевать конкретную их оценку.
And we have another question regarding contacts with Abkhazia. Russia has suspended financial support to Abkhazia since September 1st, due to non-fulfillment of its obligations on economic integration. And in November, the Parliament of Abkhazia voted against the ratification of the agreement on investments of Russian legal entities in the local economy, taking into account Sukhumi's request for the resumption of social payments from Moscow. At what stage are the negotiations on the integration of Abkhazia into the Russian economic zone?
You know, this is a part that is related to the competence of other departments. I can only clarify, either contact you with one of them, or provide their ratings. This is a topic, if you are talking about social benefits, about the degree of negotiations on economic integration, which is the responsibility of our other departments and ministries. But I will definitely clarify.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Liana Dalu is with us.
Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna.
Yes, good afternoon.
We have a question on the Middle East, in particular on Syria. Some colleagues have already asked this question, and you have commented on the Dutch Heights, but we have slightly reformatted the question, and would like to ask it in this way. The Israeli army continues its attacks on the territory of Syria, and, in particular, on military facilities. Yesterday, there were attacks on the port of Lataki, and threats from the Israeli military leadership towards the opposition forces in Syria are increasingly being heard. In this regard, how does the Foreign Ministry assess Israel's actions in case of continuation of such a course? How will it affect the situation in the Middle East in general?
But I just commented, I do not know how your question differs from the questions of colleagues. I just said about him that there is international law, there are bilateral agreements between Syria and Israel, there are steps that bring great destabilization. They are definitely not the ones that contribute to calming the situation. And she just said all this. You know, well, maybe she was missing something. Perhaps it is really worth saying that Syria is and should be a sovereign state. This is how our country has always treated her, providing assistance, providing support. And it seems to me that it is from these positions that all other members of the international community should treat it as a sovereign, independent state. So much for the global answer to how to evaluate strikes. Is it possible, so to speak, to consider this as the norm? Of course not. And even more, so in the situation in which Syria is now. All actions of the international community should bring a stabilizing role, play a stabilizing role. If those who speak out on the topic of Syria are concerned about the fate of the Syrian people. If not, then it is necessary to say, to express some other assessments. But we also hear other assessments, which I also said today, outspoken, which are not related to caring about Syria as a state, the Syrian people, but about their ambitions. Does this apply? And does it relate to international law? Of course not either.
Thanks for the answer.
Thank you. Lee Verelk is with us.
Good afternoon, Maria Vladimirovna.
Yes, hello.
I have one question today. The other day, Russian Deputy Foreign Minister Alexander Pankin, on the sidelines of the Verona Eurasian Forum in Etham, commenting on the refusal of the Armenian authorities to pay contributions to the STO, said that Armenia could not pay this debt for 2 years. Then appropriate decisions will be made. I would like to know from you what decisions can be made. Russia will raise the issue of excluding Armenia from the STO. And in this regard, I would like to understand, yes, whether this will not be what the Armenian authorities want with me, who themselves do not officially come out, but in fact do everything, so that you exclude the country.
Here I can't understand. You have just said that Armenia does not pay contributions. And or you don't intend to. Did I understand you correctly?
But I quoted the words from Mr. Pankin. Well, the existing one.
In my opinion, in general, this issue should be addressed to the authorities in Armenia, Yerevan. They pay, they don't pay, they intend to pay. It seems to me, where should this question go? Why should we comment on the intentions of the Armenian authorities to pay or not to pay contributions? Secondly, the addressee of this issue is the STO Secretariat. In my opinion, it should be so. Both regularly share comments. Then let me start with something that can really relate to us. The principle of financing the STO here, in my opinion, is not much different from other international structures. Financing of the organization's activities is an integral obligation of any of the members of this structure. The STO budget is formed at the expense of shared contributions of the member states. Back in the 2003 year, the countries approved the distribution of these shared contributions. They happen, they are divided, or they are distributed as a percentage. Russia finances exactly half of the STO budget. Other allies in equal shares of 10% of any form, let's call it abstention from financing, non-stipulated contributions not listed in the current fiscal year, form the debt of the state. In case of non-fulfillment of obligations to repay debts to the budget of the organization within 2 years, the Collective Security Council may take a decision with respect to the debtor state up to the deprivation of its voting rights. Similar approaches work, for example, in the organization of the UN system. Yes, in fact, they served as a prototype for the formation of approaches to the STO budget as an international experience. It's as it is. Armenia agreed with this at the time. I didn't hear that they were against it. Whether they will pay or not is a question for Yerevan. Accordingly, having received one or another answer, it will be possible to clarify why here. And as for what intentions, if they do not pay, you also need to ask them. I want to say once again that if there is a question whether any documents have been received from official structures in Yerevan to the STO about withdrawing from this structure, we do not know anything about it. This was stated by the Russian leadership, in particular the leadership of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. No such documents were received. At the same time, we hear a statement that they seem to no longer see themselves or see themselves beyond some kind of framework. Someone came out of someone and so on, but it's better to ask about it, and it is necessary to ask, of course, directly the representatives of Armenia.
Maria Vladimirovna, here you said the deprivation of voice. It turns out this is not an exception, but simply to lose the voice of a country that has not paid for 2 years.
I quoted the statutory, one might say, documents of the STO. Yes, but there is this structure, its secretariat, which perfectly interact with the media. They can just give you a more detailed answer. I have told you about this question, answered your question, and told you, maybe in more general terms. But yes, it is.
Thank you very much.
Yes. So is the Greater Asia TV channel with us. Maria Vladimirovna, hello. Yes, hello. Today, we have one question: how the Russian Foreign Ministry assesses the impact of the domestic political crisis in South Korea on the strategic security issues of the entire Northeast Asia. And can we say that the current political chaos in Seoul will temporarily have a deterrent effect on the expansion of the trilateral military alliance of the United States, Japan and South Korea, and, as a result, Can this slow down the formation of a certain embryo of the notorious Asian NATO? You know, in general, I would like to hope that the situation there will stabilize and the consequences of what is happening will not negatively affect the military-political situation on the Korean Peninsula. I would like to hope so. And it seems to me that a lot of people are asking your question in this context, because the situation was already difficult, because it was constantly provoked by the states, constantly provoked from the outside. But as it seems to me, we have now seen false accusations have always been flying at the drunkard. But on the example of what is happening in Seoul now, we see that the destabilizing waves are just coming from, alas, unfortunately, those who are wards of Washington. This is the first moment. The second point is that our country consistently adheres to the principled position on the need for collective measures to de-escalate tensions, to ensure peace and security in this sub-region. Again, look at the United States of America, alas, and those who are in solidarity with their aggressive approach are South Korea. Japan, on the contrary, are actively engaged in putting together an aggressive military-political bloc and further militarization of Northeast Asia. Now, as for the possible impact of current events in South Korea on Washington's plans to form the so-called Asian NATO. In this question, as I think you see again, South Korea is not the main actor, but by and large, in general, the object of Washington's experiments. Although yes, Russia is closely involved in the preparation of a springboard for the penetration of NATO potential in this part of the world. But another thing is that it seems to me that the democracy formed by the United States in the southern part of the Korean peninsula is constantly somehow knocked out of the normal life support system. Look, but there has not been a single, in my opinion, in the decades since the 60s of the 20th century, a leader of South Korea who would have quietly resigned and, so to speak, would not have ended his life tragically. This happens to literally everyone, either some kind of coup, or some kind of corruption investigations, or prison sentences, or suicides, or death, and so on. It would be better to deal with the internal problems of South Korea. Well, if South Korea needs helpers in the form of the United States, then let them help, if it suits Seoul. So that's where to start. This is where there is obviously an opportunity to apply their knowledge, efforts, and not take up the arrangement of the whole region. And this, obviously, has all the claims of the states. And yes, indeed, South Korea is closely involved in preparing a springboard for the penetration, as I have already said, of the NATO potential in this part of the world. And this process is multi-layered, it is multivector. Its implementation is carried out not only within the framework of the Union of Seoul, Tokyo, and Washington, but also through the joint efforts of the four key regional satellites of the United States, including, in addition to South Korea and Japan, Australia and New Zealand. And in the context of maintaining the globalization of the NATO mandate, each of these countries performs its own specific functions. Canberra, for example, took the path of participating in the creation of the Triple AUKUS bloc. These are the states of Britain, Australia with a nuclear component. The association is now preparing to expand by connecting important players for the Anglo-Saxons to formally unrelated weapons of mass destruction, but nevertheless a danger from the point of view of the final result of the military technical track. But such a natification of Asia is carried out not only through these channels, but also through others. The Euro-Atlantic component is at the heart of the illegitimate multilateral group for monitoring sanctions against the DPRK. The Indo-Pacific conferences of the commanders of the armed forces and the leadership of the intelligence services held under the leadership of the United States. I think it is difficult now to give any definitive answer to the question of whether this Asian NATO itself will eventually form into an organization by analogy with Western sources or Western models, or whether it will be about opening up the political field of the infrastructure of the Asia-Pacific region for Euro-Atlantists to join it. Right now, we are just observing the implementation, the active implementation of the second scenario, but it is already obvious that such a counterproductive line is fraught with the most negative consequences for regional stability, because the ideologists of such a reconfiguration are based on aggression, hegemonism, neocolonial attitudes. Is the voice of the fatherland with us?
Yes, hello, Maria Vladimirovna.
Yes, hello.
That's the question. Maybe, in your opinion, there are some mistakes that were made in force by the people or the leadership. Well, or maybe we have drawn some conclusions and learned from it. In your opinion, is there something like that?
I hope you have heard the introductory part, where I said that there is a lot that still needs to be analyzed. And I think many people are doing this now. It's just that we are now focused more on the security of our citizens, our facilities, for which it is necessary to take a number of concrete steps. I can say once again what I said today. The mass media meets almost around the clock. Today, the operational headquarters of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has once again met to ensure the security of Russian citizens in Syria, and appropriate decisions are being worked out. The Russian country is in contact with everyone, with many. Now, it is impossible to talk about the word everything, because it is difficult even to identify all political forces, but with many political forces to implement, I say again, issues and goals related to the security of our citizens, our facilities, and, in general, to build interaction with the forces that are now coming to power in Syria. In Syria, that's what we're focused on right now. I won't even promise you, because it was done in the beginning, that all the analytical calculations, and on the basis of factual material, they are being made now will be made. I'm just going to repeat once again. I'm sorry for having to talk about this once again. But really now our priority work is the safety of Russian citizens and Russian facilities on the territory of Syria. But, of course, everything will be analyzed, and we will also share our assessments. In addition to what we talked about today, thank you very much, and we will meet with you until the next time. In the meantime, well-being, thank you.